And good morning, Shalom. I am very pleased for this opportunity. I've had, it seems that I've had several weeks of learning since arriving here just yesterday. So I'm looking forward to a continuation of that learning curve. As you know, my advertised topic for today was promoting faculty of underrepresented minority communities in educational systems. And that indeed is the focus of what I'll be talking about today. But in the context of a model and a set of approaches that we've developed over the years and studying systems in the US, around the US, and internationally, that essentially aid us in achieving and pursuing those kinds of ends of simply creating climates that were conducive of and supportive of and encouraging of diversity. So creating positive climates for diversity that have relevance not only for faculty but for students, with this goal of increasing representation in those populations on a particular campus. I begin with acknowledgments. It's good to see my good friend Rami. It's been several years since I've spent time with him. He was a visitor at UCLA for many years ago when I was just arriving there from the University of Michigan. And we've seen one another at international meetings subsequently to that. A very heartfelt thanks to Mofet. This institute is really quite a remarkable enterprise, and I've just been tremendously impressed as I've learned more and more about your work and the focus particularly on teacher education, which in all too often is underemphasized and undervalued. And so to see this kind of an investment in that set of activities, not only by those of you in this room in this institute, but by government, is for me refreshing, because as we all know, because we are teachers, that it all begins and ends with us, and so the work we do is just so critical in terms of shaping the future, shaping not only the futures of the children and young people that we touch, but also the societies that we function in. And then of course thank you to the U.S. Fulbright program. I have purposely labeled today's presentation a conversation. And it is my hope that this will encourage engagement around the issues that are going to be raised during this presentation, where we will have useful and fruitful exchanges with one another. Now, I begin with a very important caveat. I make no claim to any special knowledge or any even general knowledge about the situation of higher education in Israel. Instead, I'm frankly ignorant and come to you as an eager student, trying to learn as much as I can about higher education issues in Israel. I have and make no claim or assumption that the knowledge that I bring from my research in the U.S. and my research internationally in other contexts, South Africa, France, Zimbabwe, will automatically generalize to Israel. However, I am a sociologist by training, and as such, we're taught to seek comparisons between systems with the expectation that there will emerge in those comparisons and from those comparisons useful information about similarities as well as differences. And I'm persuaded that such comparisons can teach all of us quite a bit about the subject matter that we are focused on. And at the very least, such comparisons and such conversations as I am hoping we will engage in today will lead us to the conversations and exchanges that, as I understand it, are a very central element of your enterprise here. Just this whole notion of getting people to talk and to share, and in such talking and sharing to learn the lessons that can be extracted. Now, for today's presentation, I thought that I would begin at the end. And this is going to require a little bit of gymnastics for me as I try to work through this Hebrew version of I think I found it. I'm fine. I'm fine. Yes. I'm as surprised as you are. And beginning at the end is simply requiring that I share with you the results from a study of diversity in the professorate in the United States. These data are from an ongoing national survey of 15,000 faculty annually across the U.S. And the subsample of that faculty who are faculty of color or minority faculty, those numbers annually are in the vicinity of about 2,000. And that particular study coming out of the Center for Higher Education Research, Higher Education Research Institute at UCLA, have been gathered over now, in terms of faculty surveys, about 30 years. So an analysis of data from these studies allowed us to produce this particular paper, which I wanted to summarize and share with you, and then move from this summary of research findings to a discussion of, okay, we have a certain situation for the professorate and diversity in that professorate or lack thereof, and what do we do about it? Because that, again, seems to me to be the focus of this institute and an important focus of any change orientation. It's one thing, and it's very important to document what the current situation is, but then where do we go from there and what do we do with it? So after I do a quick summary of the findings, I'll move to the conversation in the PowerPoint of, okay, so what? We know, for example, that despite anti-discrimination legislation and affirmative action, faculty of color remain significantly underrepresented in U.S. higher education, and for that matter, often in higher education internationally. When present, they often occupy less prestigious positions and have less than optimal conditions for service in terms of workload, compensation, and what have you. While the numbers of undergraduate and graduate students of color on campuses have risen over the years, the growth in the numbers of faculty of color continues to lag behind. Increasingly, faculty of color in the academy, increasing the number of faculty of color in the academy would provide mentors, role models, and a sense of connection that students of color and junior faculty of color often lack on predominantly white campuses in the U.S. Another compelling reason for securing greater faculty diversity lies in the potential that faculty of color bring toward institutional and societal transformation. So this study was born out of interest in further exploring the influences of institutional and environmental factors on the retention of faculty of color in the academy, and for that matter, on the recruitment of faculty of color to the academy. It addresses the following research questions. To what extent are racial climate and faculty job satisfaction related to intentions to leave the academy among faculty of color? What are the factors related to faculty job satisfaction? And 3, how are these relationships similar and or different when disaggregating racial groups and making comparisons with white faculty? So often we discuss disadvantage and underrepresentation without mentioning their corollaries, privilege and overrepresentation. The disparity in retention rates for faculty of color and white faculty is a function of who is privileged to define what matters or what is valued in academia and how excellence is to be measured. The findings from this research highlight the notion that that racial hierarchy and advantage can be perpetuated without necessarily being malicious in intent. And that general kind of concluding point just applies to minority and majority relationships, however one defines them, as our research has led us to conclude internationally, because we are in the midst of several international projects looking at questions of diversity in higher education, and particularly examining the status of majority and minority populations as faculty, as administrators, as students in those higher educational settings. Now, as I close this, I will share with you that I, in fact, did forward the full study that this is an abstract of to Moffett, and so you can actually go and read the full research project. But having just made these general points, I would now like to move to the question of so what, which is very critical as we think about these issues. That is, we've seen that there are disparities in the experiences in terms of access, in terms of retention, in terms of excellence for achievement of positive outcomes for underrepresented faculty relative to majority faculty. So the question then becomes one of how do we change or influence those campus climates so that we can change those kinds of outcomes and create a situation that is enhancing of not only the status of and the work conditions and the outcomes for majority faculty, but also achieving a similar end for minority or underrepresented faculty. Now, key considerations and assumptions. And I should, as a sort of corollary, make the point that I will move between commentary on faculty, on commentary on students, even commentary on administrators, because the key issue is one of looking at how minority status relative to majority status impacts teaching and learning in higher education. So my point being that many of the points I make about students have their applicability as well to faculty who are in these racial contexts. So having said that, key assumptions of the approach. Students are educated in distinct racial contexts in the US. That is, these contexts that are shaped by external and internal or institutional forces. Now, most institutions focus on only one element of the climate. That is, they want to simply increase representation of an underrepresented group. But there are other elements of that climate that also require attention and are key to any success. Otherwise, you often will see this revolving door effect. That is, you add to the population, and then the next year you look up, or the next 5 years you look up, and you're confronting the same situation again of underrepresentation. So what exactly is going on? So this requires that we broaden our focus to not only, and of course increasing numbers is critical, but retention is equally critical, as is improving the overall experiences and achievements of those populations that are historically underrepresented. Now, how do external forces shape climate? What are some of those forces? The external forces can represent, and often do represent, the impact of government policy, programs, and initiatives. Funding for higher education, for example, funding for the hiring or recruitment of underrepresented faculty. Policies regarding positive discrimination, as it's referred to in parts of Europe, and in the US, affirmative action. That is simply going the extra step to recruit and the extra step to retain underrepresented groups. Thank you, Anna. Very much appreciated. Court decisions related to the issues of recruitment and desegregation of majority settings. How states or how government provide for institutional differentiation within their government systems of higher education. All of these are government influences. Similarly, a set of important external forces is represented by socio-historical forces. That is, events or issues in the larger society connected to the ways in which people view diversity or difference on the campus or in higher education. Now, what are some of the internal forces to pay attention to in terms of how these shape climate? Institutional context contains multiple dimensions that are a function of educational programs and practices, including historical legacy of inclusion or exclusion of different groups. Structural diversity in terms of just the sheer numerical representation of different groups or the demographics of a campus. The psychological climate of a campus, that is, including the perceptions and attitudes among and between different groups on those campuses, among and between majority and minority groups on the campuses. And then indeed the behavioral climate itself, that is characterized by what is the nature of intergroup relations and exchanges on a campus. Now that as background basically is all summarized by this figure, which simply speaks to this question of the elements that influence the climate for racial and ethnic diversity, or the elements that influence the campus climate for diversity, if you will. And it's a summary of what I've talked about. You have the external factors of government policy and socio-historical context, and the internal factors or the institutional factors of historical legacies of inclusion, exclusion, structural diversity or demographics, the psychological climate on the campus, and then the behavioral or interpersonal exchanges on that campus. I go into some discussion of historical legacies of inclusion or exclusion using the American case. And for us, of course, race always looms large, just given the history of American society. But again, I emphasize the need to think about the issues as being broader than race and really about power relationships between minority and majority groups, about privilege relationships between majority and minority populations, or majority and underrepresented populations. By way of a summary of the U.S. case, those issues are demonstrated by a history of resistance to desegregation, the maintenance of old campus policies that privileged the majority population and penalized the minority population, and attitudes and behaviors that prevent interaction across racial and ethnic groups. Now, because these are embedded in a culture of historically segregated environments, many campuses both consciously and unconsciously sustain and continue long-standing benefits for particular student groups, for particular faculty groups, for particular populations, which often go unrecognized or at the very least unacknowledged. They are those kinds of hidden privileges that I referenced in my earlier remarks about the study that you can access from the PDF which I sent earlier. Now, so in assessing the history of a particular campus, it is important, it is critical that we look for and understand those embedded benefits that exist on the campus. Benefits that, for example, privilege males over females, privilege Europeans over non-Europeans, privilege those who have higher economic status over those who have lower economic status. And often those are as simple as in that last case of economic differences, as simple as whether one can afford a laptop. And I mean, there's no explicit discrimination, but the fact of the matter is, if the teaching approach is founded on and organized around laptops, and then there are these very distinct differences between who can and cannot afford laptops, then that is an embedded benefit or privilege and an embedded penalty or disadvantage. Structural diversity. Research shows us that this is just indeed an important initial step. But at the same time, not only must we increase the numbers of the underrepresented faculty on a campus or the underrepresented students on a campus, we must also work hard to maximize opportunities for cross-group and cross-racial interaction, encouraging discussions about privilege and disadvantage, and encouraging discussions about difference in those settings. And when the effects of increased structural diversity are considered without addressing these issues in the middle, we often are thwarted in the goals of improving representation in the populations that we're trying to diversify on a particular campus. Now, the challenges of increased structural diversity. Needless to say, addressing these issues can be very delicate and often will bring some controversy, some conflict, some resistance, just some discomfort. It moves people out of their comfort zones, if nothing else, in terms of raising such points and issues. But needless to say, that is at the very core of education. We must be moved out of our comfort zones in order to grow, in order to educate. Because if we stay in our comfort zones, then we lose and miss opportunities for increased growth, development, expansion of our personalities, our experiences, and our learning. The pressure for change affects both academic and social lives on a particular campus. And it has led to, in the instance of the U.S., the development of specialized ethnic studies programs, if you will, diverse student organizations on the campuses, specific and targeted academic support programs, and multicultural programming. With respect to psychological climate on a campus, the views that individuals have of group relations, how institutions respond to diversity, perceptions of discrimination on the campus, and attitudes towards others from different backgrounds are all key in shaping a psychological climate on a particular campus. Where you have diverse administrators, students, and faculty, you will quite naturally have different views of a campus and different views of the institution. That's a simple principle of life, both as we know it experientially and as we have learned about it from a research point of view. Where one is positioned in a system very much influences how one experiences, views, and evaluates that system or that institution.